Hi, everybody. Welcome to our weekly community talk. Today's topic is how thinking like a product manager sets you up for success in any role. We have with us today Sam Love, CPO at Wefox, and I will be your host tonight. Before handing over to Sam, I would like to take a few moments to talk about me and my company. I am Angelica Testini, Senior Product Manager at Product People. I've been in product management for more than 6 years, 3 of which spent on payments and billing. I have spent most of my career in a company called Amadeus, which is a company working in the travel industry. I've been lucky enough to interact with different companies in the payment industry. I've been working also with urban mobility companies like WeShare, a company in the education technology called GoStudent, and a music fintech called Utopia Music. I am a physicist at heart. I studied nanotechnologies, but then quickly transitioned and fell in love with product management. I am Italian. I live in France, and what you see here is Antibes, the city I live in. And yeah, that's all for me. Now, about Product People, we are on a mission to help companies discover and deliver great products as fast as possible. We love our product management community. We love sharing knowledge generously. We have more than 12,000 members. And at the same time, we also enjoy getting our hands dirty. So we do the hands-on unglamorous work of a PM on an interim basis. We are pros at onboarding fast. We believe that alignment is key, and we are outcome-driven. Now, before getting started with the talk, we have 2 questions. For the people on Zoom, you will see a pop-up with a poll with these 2 questions, and you will be able to answer. There's the pop-up, so you will be able to answer directly in the pop-up. And for those who are following us through the other streaming platforms, you will be able to answer through the chat. Please make sure you mention the number of the answer you're giving an answer to, of the question you're giving an answer to, and we're gonna read your answers as well. So here's our questions. What do you think makes product managers so well-rounded? A, dealing with different stakeholders. B, exposure to different tools and technology. C, keeping up with user needs and problems. D, other. Mention whatever you want in the comments. Second question, which skill do you think is the most transferable from PM to other roles? A, people management. B, communication. C, risk management. D, negotiation. E, problem solving. Or F, others. Now, give us your answers, and we're going to see the results shortly. Now, I'm going to submit my answer. Now, if I had to give my answer, I would definitely say that dealing with different stakeholders is key for the first question, because it's very challenging to understand where they are coming from, what are their needs, and adjust to that. That's at least my personal experience. And for the second question, I would say that the most valuable and transferable skill is probably problem solving, because that's really something that we learn a lot from every single day. So that would be my take on it. And there's our results. So we see that 56% of people seem to also consider dealing with stakeholders something that makes product managers well-rounded. There's also some people who think that keeping up with user needs and problems is very important and very valuable. Definitely agree with that. And for the second question, more than half of people answering think that communication is a very transferable and important skill. And the second one is problem solving. Mansoor, can we see what the others' proposals were? No, I was not able to see it.
Yeah, can you see the pop-up again?
Yeah. Okay. I guess we can move on. So we are ready to hand over to Sam. Before we start, just a quick reminder, you are welcome to ask your questions anytime, but we will address them at the end of the talk. There's going to be a dedicated Q&A question. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to you, Sam. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Angelica. And I will try to share my screen, so just bear with me. Classic question. Angelica, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Fantastic. First of all, thank you to the team at Product People for inviting me to the community talk today. And thank you for everybody who's joined both to the meeting, but also if you're watching later on YouTube or elsewhere. When Mansoor approached me about doing a talk like this topic for some reason was very close of mind. And for those of you who've perhaps listening who have worked with me before, you'll know that I'm a big believer in developing transferable skills, and that really appreciate that zooming out ability that is required, I think, for successful product management, but is also extremely valuable if you're transferring to a new role from product management, but equally if you're transferring from a different role to product management. And I'm sure there are plenty of people on this call who are really interested in getting into product management. And here we'll talk a little bit about some of the techniques that you could bring or work on in your existing role that will also set you up for success as a product manager. So first of all, a little bit about me. So I'm Sam Love. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Wefox. I've been with the company for almost 3 years now and have built a product team from about 5 people to over 55 people today. And that team is mostly product managers, product designers, product analysts, and as well as advanced innovation. You can probably pick up from the accent that I am not German, although I am based in Berlin and have been for 6 years. My German is still terrible, I'm afraid. But from Sydney in Australia, where I worked in data analytics at the beginning of my career. So I think like very many people in my generation of product leaders, didn't set out to be a product manager. And in fact, back then, wouldn't have even known what product management was. But it happened that the role that I was in, so working in a consultancy and working on enterprise projects for large media owners and retailers, a lot of the skills that I developed in that period of my career served me really well when I then transitioned, moving to Berlin and to my first, let's say, official product management role. And so we'll talk about some of those things today. What I will not even attempt to do is to provide a definition of what product management is. The internet is full of different ways of thinking about product management, different ways of defining product management. A lot of the skills that Angelica listed earlier are really important aspects of product management, as well as many other roles. But what we will spend a little bit of time unpacking are some of the key frameworks that I think are very valuable for a product manager, but also apply to many, many other roles and positions. So for people in my team, they'll hear this question a lot. It's something that we think about a lot when we tackle a new problem, but also important when we think about a feature and a feature development. And that is, what problem am I solving for who? When we're in an ideation phase for a new product, this kind of solution problem match is important. And so we zoom out and we really need to ask this question. But also when we get into the weeds a little bit, it's always valuable to take a step back and ask yourself, really, what problem am I solving? And who am I solving it for? For those of you who are familiar with a tool called the Lean Canvas, I have to admit, I can't remember who it was developed by, but I had it on my list of things to look up before I joined this call, but I did not. This for me has been a really valuable framework to focus thinking when I'm approaching either a new product or ideation phase, or even if it's just about taking that step back that I mentioned to refocus a little bit. And there are two really important parts for this. So one is the problem that we're solving. So if you're not really solving something for someone, your chance of getting a product market fit is not going to be there. And understanding who you are actually solving it for is really fundamental. So if you're a more junior product manager, you're probably thinking about this on a feature level, and asking yourself or reminding yourself to ask this question can really help you focus your thinking. And if we're talking about a more senior product manager who's maybe working on a bigger feature set, or a product evolution, this question is also key. But if we take this example and we apply it to another role, how can this help people be successful in that role? And the example that I'll carry through a little bit this presentation is, let's say I'm in a people team or a human resources team, and I need to develop an onboarding process. By asking myself the question, what problem am I solving for, and who am I solving, and who am I solving, what problem am I solving, and who am I solving it for, can help me understand, are there different stakeholders that I have missed? So if we take the example of onboarding, of course, there's the new employee. So setting up a great experience where that employee knows where they need to be at a certain time, they have their computer set up and everything they need to be successful in their new role. This is a big part of the product, if you like, that I'm offering as a human resources partner. But I also have the hiring manager and the person who is then going to be doing the functional onboarding of that person. So I also need to think about them and their needs, and they might have different needs to the new employee who I'm onboarding. And going beyond that, you also have people like the IT team who need to be able to provide that equipment in time. You might have office management who need to make sure that the space is there. So by asking this question, you're already starting to unpack some of the complexity that is required to deliver your product, or in this case, a process. But the same applies for a product manager who is in the business of product management. So if you are familiar with the Lean Canvas framework, you'll know that we have the problem and the customer on the one side, and then we want to understand, how will I know if I've been successful? So what are the key metrics that I want to measure to help me understand if I've achieved solving that problem for the person that I want to solve the problem for? And this, I believe, is a really important question to ask up front, particularly as a product manager. And if you already have a product analytics capability, this is something that you'll know a lot about. But if whether you're building a new feature or launching a new product, knowing how you will measure success. So what metric will move in what direction if you are achieving your product market fit, and doing that upfront is really important. If we take our HR example, there might be a number of different metrics that will help the HR team to understand if they have been successful in solving the problems for their particular users. So one way you could understand if you're successful is the positive feedback from the new people who've onboarded. So there could be a metric or a survey that's built around that. The other one is hiring satisfaction. So satisfaction for the hiring manager. Do the hiring managers know where they need to be at a certain time? And again, this could be more qualitative feedback. But there will be other metrics that can be tracked without needing to ask people questions. And as we think about a product that scales, being able to measure these types of things is really key and a fundamental part of what makes a successful product, but also the thinking that helps us understand upfront how we can be successful in other roles is an important pre-work to do. And I think it's a very important consideration and a step that can often be skipped. Not knowing what to measure until after you've built a feature has a tendency to, let's say, pick a metric that favors your own hypothesis as a product manager, but also can skew the effectiveness measure of anything that we're implementing in the workplace, whether that's in product, HR, or elsewhere. So we've had our good idea, we've identified our problem, we've identified who we're solving it for, we know what it looks like when we are successful, and we know how to measure that success. But a really key part, and for the product managers on the call, you'll know how important this is who needs to know about it and how will they know. So this can be at any stage during the development process. So if you think about the process of developing a new feature, a product manager is always, or should always be thinking, who do I need to talk to and who do I need to engage for me to be able to solve the problem that I'm seeking to solve effectively, so that I can see my metrics go in the direction that I hope my metrics go in. And then how do I engage them in that process? So this applies both during the development phase, but also in the release and in the follow-up. So during the development phase, we as product managers, we often seek to talk to our customers. We seek to talk to other stakeholders, and we engage them in that process. This skill is also really beneficial when we are in other processes. So if we're designing an onboarding process for HR, for example, having conversations with recent new starters to the organization, to hiring managers, to IT is really important. And these are the people who need to know about it in the design phase. How will they know about it? This, of course, depends. If you're in the design phase, it's often as simple as going through and having a conversation. Maybe you've got your own tools for recruiting different customers. If you're in B2B, actually sitting down with people and watching them work is part of the how they will know. And the same thing will apply in any other role that you're in. We then look at the release phase. So let's take our example of HR, and the HR team have built an onboarding process. And okay, the people who were part of that design process, they already know, but they need to now scale that across a 10,000 person organization. Who needs to know about their processes and how will they find out? When we think about this at Wefox, where I work, it will depend on the product and it'll depend on the iteration. So each different feature might actually have a different target audience that expects to be communicated to in a different way. So we might, for some things, it's sufficient to communicate on Slack, but this only works for our internal audience. So they're an important group of people who need to know, and then they become evangelists to their people in the outside world, if they've got broker partners, for example. But we also will think about how do we reach those people directly, and this could be through a newsletter. Now, people are very busy, so they don't always open their mail, they don't always read their newsletter. So again, we go back to needing to talk not to the customer in the end, but to talk to the broker partner who is part of that education. So understanding who needs to know what when is a really important, let's say, first step in communication, whether you're a product manager or you're designing another person, but also thinking how will they know about it is taking that a step further. So people typically don't always just listen to your communication. You then also need to understand how to reach them, and sometimes that is indirectly. And then we go back to our measurement points. How do you know if they are being reached? And is that having the impact on your success factors that you thought it would? Taking our HR example again, we have the need to communicate to, let's say, other HR representatives around the organization, a 10,000 person organization in this case. These people could form a hub, and then they need to communicate it into their different parts of their teams and other parts of the countries. other organizations, but this is indirect. Or it could also be that there is training needed for hiring managers, and this can be a lot more hands-on. So it's not just who needs to know now, but it is what they need to know, and that will also inform your how. Taking this as a framework, we've given one example of how what's important for product management applies to other roles. And what I'd like to I guess, drive home for this group here is to think about, if you're an aspiring product manager, how you can bring some of this thinking into your role. So I often talk to people who've got let's say a data analytics background. This is my background. And to think about some of these questions when it comes to solving a data problem, as an example. So again, what problem am I solving and who am I solving it for? If you can't have a good answer to this question, there's a couple of things you can do. So it could be that your stakeholder hasn't articulated it, and it's a really, really good opportunity to ask. Or what often happens, and often happens in the product world as well, the problem isn't really there, and the benefit of solving it won't be realized. So sometimes when you ask these questions and you can't come up with a meaningful answer, it's not because it's not necessarily because of a lack of understanding. Sometimes it is because you haven't actually landed on a problem worth solving yet. So it could apply to data analytics. And I know a lot of people early in the data career get a little bit frustrated by this, but equally, this applies to product management. How will I know if I've been successful? If again, we can't answer this question, often it means that something isn't quite there yet with our hypothesis. So if you can't identify what it means to successfully solve the problem for the person you're solving it for, or the group of people you're solving it for, it may be actually that the hypothesis is not well structured. And I would strongly recommend, if you can, of course, corporate realities aren't always this way, that if you are in a situation where you can't identify the success measure, that you actually take a step back and you work with your stakeholders to unpack the problem a little bit more, because often if that is the case, the problem and the person or the persons you're solving it for aren't necessarily the right ones. And lastly, a perfect solution to a perfect problem is completely meaningless if people don't know about it. And so we need to know who needs to know about it. It's not always the customer directly. And we need to know how they will know about it. So this is not just about what method you use for delivery, but also the structure of the communication. Is it a training course? Is it a Zoom call with some lovely product people? And designing this and having a plan for this up front will mean that people will know that you've solved the problem. They know how you've helped them solve the problem. And this will ultimately allow you to see whether or not you've been successful. So I'm actually going to stop there. I'm not sure what that was in terms of timing. I feel like it was maybe a little bit less than 20 minutes. But I do know Mansoor and the team told me that there are a few aspiring product managers typically joining these calls. Wefox is currently looking for both product interns and product associates. So I would invite you, if that applies to you, to check out our careers page on the website. And we'd love to hear from some of you there as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. I'm gonna take back the screen share. Bear a second with me. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now. Thank you very much, Sam, for your talk. Thank you guys for listening. Now start thinking about your questions and use the Zoom chat or the chatted comments of the other streaming platforms. Before we get into that, and to give you guys a bit of time to think about your questions, I'm going to speak a tiny bit more about product people. So these are some of the moments in which it's awesome to reach to us and engage with us. These are some of the use cases in which we've been successful. We usually are very successful. First of all, interim product management. So replacing someone for a temporary leave or to cover waiting for the right person to hire. That's usually a very common problem. The second use case is product coaching or consulting. And the third use case is product discovery lead on specific, urgent, important initiatives. Some of the companies with which we've been successful are Zalando, Techstar, WeShare, Omio, just to name a few. You can find more information about this on our website if you're interested. Now, this is a collage from our wonderful, very diverse team. We are a remote first company, so we are all based in Europe. I'm based in France, for example. What I love about working at Product People is that we are a community first. So each of us has their own baggages and experiences, and we know that if you have a question, if you have a problem, you are sure there is someone who's going to be able to help. And this is my favorite thing of all of working at Product People. Now, as you can see, we have saved the spot for you, because if you are a product manager looking for your next step, your next challenge, or you are interested in transitioning in product management, we are hiring too. We are hiring product managers at all levels. So if you're interested, if you think you might be a nice addition to the team, have a look at productpeople.join.com and apply. Now, that is it for me. Now it's really time for the Q&A. And we're gonna look at some of your questions. So maybe I can start with my questions. I have written down a couple of them. I'm very interested in the, I found this very interesting, Sam, what you said about the possibility to, the fact that we need to pay attention to not choosing success metrics that are biased and that we favor our own hypothesis. I think that's a real risk. I probably have done it myself in the past. Do you have any suggestion on how to avoid that?
Yeah, I think you studied physics, right, Angelica? So you should be all fully aware of the scientific method. I mean, do it before you run your experiment. So every time we launch a product, it's essentially an experiment. So whether or not we set it up as an A/B test or whatever it is, thinking about it in advance is probably the best advice that I can give. Of course, sometimes it's going to be biased, and I think that's okay, but there is a tendency, if you haven't set up your metrics or haven't understood what success looks like actually up front, that you'll have a lot of statistics at the end of the process or at the end of your experiment. And I think it's human nature to choose the ones that make us look good, right? And we can sort of cherry pick the data a little bit, and sometimes subconsciously, to tell the story that we want to tell, because even the best product managers have some beliefs about their ideas that they want to have validated, and it's sometimes difficult actually to look for why you're wrong instead of to look for why you're right. So set your metrics up in advance.
Okay, awesome. I will keep that in mind. Look for why I'm wrong, why I might be wrong. Thank you very much. So I believe we have a question from Odunayo on Zoom. If you'd like to ask your question directly, you are welcome to unmute yourself. Otherwise, I can read it for you. So the question is, can success in product management be limited to meeting acceptance criteria?
I mean, I don't think so personally. And I mean, if your acceptance criteria are extraordinarily well written, then possibly, but that's going very, very granular. And as you grow, or certainly my experience, as you grow in your product management career, you are thinking more about the product holistically rather than an individual feature or indeed an individual user story. So by setting this framework around understanding the problem you're trying to solve and understanding what success looks like when you solve that problem, it becomes less about each tiny little building block and what that overall whole picture looks like. So for me, success in product management is really an answer to the question, did you solve the problem, or did you solve a meaningful problem for the person or the people you were trying to solve the problem for? And did that have impact? Right. And this is why amplifying your message is also really important. That's not to say that well-constructed acceptance criteria aren't important. It is important, and it's an important part of what a lot of product managers do. But I think it can't be limited to that.
Thank you. I agree. I mean, it is about people. What we do is about people, and we can just limit it to acceptance criteria. So I believe we have George with the raised hand on Zoom. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, hello from me. I don't know if you can hear me. You can hear me okay,
yes.
Angelica?
Yes,
okay,
we can
cool.
hear you.
This is George from Greece. Thanks a lot, Sam, for the great presentation. What you said applies in general. I don't have anything specific for what you just said, but you mentioned at the beginning that you grew the team from very small to around 55 people, if I remember correctly, something like that. I was wondering, in such a large team, have you ever tried to, let's say, a bit outsource interaction with clients by using someone as a UX researcher? I'm not myself UX researcher. I'm just asking because there is this a little bit small kind of a battle, who is going to get the feedback from the clients, the product owners or the UX researchers. I don't know if you have ever had this kind of people inside your team.
I mean, we're still not so large that we have really specialist roles, but what I have noticed, or it's almost inevitable, but as the team grows, the specializations within the team grow. So you have, when you're very small, product managers do everything. The role of the product manager in a very early stage startup is pretty different to the role of a product manager in a large scale technology company like Facebook, for example. And then there's everything in between. And what's the transition that we're going through is that a lot of the product operations tasks, for example, that have been done by product managers in the past, because, writing release notes and all of these kinds of things, this who needs to know about it, and how do we reach them? This is taking up more and more of their time as the product grows and the complexity of the product goes, and the audience that we have within the company also grows. And so some of these roles we're starting to create specialized roles for. And a similar thing in design. So we've had product designers up until now, really. And we've also recently had on board 2 fantastic content designers. So specifically focused on how do we use words and language to communicate a certain message and expectations with our users, because this is part of how we solve the problem for them. And they actually do, the design team at Wefox do a lot of the user research, but it typically is a partnership with a product manager, or some product managers honestly are quite passionate about user research. So we don't have very, very strictly defined roles. Some people tend to, or some product managers like to do a little bit more of their own data analysis, and this is something that they feel comfortable doing. Some of them feel more comfortable doing more UX research or participating in the design process. So we're not yet at the point where we're overly specialized, but I will say user research and the insights that you gain from user research are incredibly valuable to an organization. And it's one of the things that I take a little bit of care outsourcing completely, because that knowledge of the user is one of the most valuable things you can have as a product manager. And so if you are working with a user researcher who's either part of your team or is somebody that you've brought on for a shorter project or a more focused area of research, which I think is a perfectly valid and often sensible thing to do, spend the time going through the research yourself as a product manager, because those customer and user insights are like gold.
Great, thank you. And I think we are in the same place. I mean, even if I could choose, if there are so many things to do and you have to do through a UX researcher. Okay, maybe personally, I can hear people. Others are more bored of hearing the customers. But I think even if I had a UX researcher, I would go along. As a product owner, I would go along with him just to listen to the customer, even if he does the main part of the work, because I think this is important. But so you're considering it. So you're not doing it right now, but you're considering it. Just to summarize.
I mean, we don't rule anything out.
Yeah.
Really.
Okay.
But at the moment, this is something that we're managing internally with the team.
Okay. Thanks a lot. I'll leave I see more questions, so I'll just mute myself and let others.
Thanks.
Thank you for your question, George. And thank you, Sam. So I propose to take some questions for the other platforms also, so that we mix a bit. We have one from LinkedIn. What would you say are the main challenges in the current market in finding the best product professionals and being able to retain talent in such an active market?
Yeah, I think this is every hiring manager's question. But again, honestly, I think you can apply a product management framework in some ways to solving this problem as well. And by understanding the who in this case is product talent, and what problem do we need to solve for them as an organization? So what are they really looking for? And of course, there are the hygiene things like certain working styles, whether you're hybrid or remote. So this will reduce your target market to some extent. But you're often looking for people who want to work in a more empowered fashion. I think the product management in Europe is growing up. It's not where I think the Anglosphere are in terms of how we do and how we think about product management, but I think it is getting there. So how do we offer those things to product management talent that's out there? And there's some amazing talent out there. And what are the other things that they're looking for? And here we should talk to them. So we talk to people during interviews and we have these conversations and exchanges. But this, I think, is one way of thinking about it. A measurement of success is your acceptance rates or your application rates. And how do we get people knowing about it? I mean, we come to things like this. We also communicate on LinkedIn. So applying product thinking, let's say, even to a talent acquisition challenge, I think can be helpful for people who are in hiring roles.
Great. Thank you so much for your answer. I think we have an answer for a question from YouTube that we could take, and then we can go back to Zoom. So quick question for Sam. How do you deal with difficult or challenging stakeholders, especially when the progress is reliant on their responses or input?
That is a good question. And I think one of the answers to the poll was stakeholder management is an important transferable product skill. And, you know, it's not just product management that, or product managers that have this challenge, I think. There's a couple of things you can do. I mean, at the end of the day, people are people, and most people are very relationship based. So expecting people to respond to you just because you think they should and it's their job, I mean, yes, but each one of us are making choices about what we prioritize on a daily basis. So I'd really start by building those relationships and connections. You know, it's not always possible in a bigger organization or some stakeholders that are arm's length. Of course, that's not possible, or maybe not even appropriate. But if there are people that you expect to be working closely with and you've got a dependency on, or there's an interdependency there, I could not recommend more investing time in that relationship. The other side to that, I think, is understanding what's in it for them. So why would they provide you with the input that you need? And it's your job to help them understand that, right? So what problem are you ultimately solving for them? Or why is it important in the context of the organization's broader goals, right? So providing a little bit of that explanation and context up front can also help a lot. Sometimes it's going on a 3-step process, you know, so this indirect communication that we talked about earlier, sometimes you're not actually the best person, or there's a indirect way that you can get to what you need a little bit more effectively. And sometimes this is a path that can make sense to take, but of course it depends on the circumstances. And I'd never recommend going over someone's heads. That should be an absolute last resort, but understanding what motivates them, I think, is the best place to start in building that relationship.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. I fully agree. At the end of the day, we're often solving a problem for them, either directly or indirectly. So that's key in the relationships. Awesome. I think we have a raised hand in Zoom. Ashish, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question directly.
Hi Sam, thanks for the talk. I mean, I agree with the topic today. Nothing much to ask on that, but it's very rare that we have chief product officers on a call. So I'll just take this opportunity to understand more about Wefox, and so I want to know, like, how's the culture in Wefox for especially the aspiring product managers who are planning to join, and second, like, what is the hiring process like in Wefox, especially for interns or somebody like me transition into product management. So I'm also trying to see what is out there and how I can transition. So so my 2 questions for you would be the culture in Wefox, and secondly, how is the hiring process in Wefox for interns or APMs?
Mm-hmm. Both good questions. I mean, to keep this pretty short, because I think this isn't so much about Wefox today as about product people, although I do get a sneaky little plug for our internship and the associate programs. But the culture we aspire to create is one of ownership, of aligned goals, and of informed decision making, so that we actually take responsibility for that, and what comes with that is trust. And this is something that I think is fundamental to a productive and a scaling product organization. Something that, you know, I get asked this question in interviews quite a bit, and one thing about the broader Wefox culture that's really struck me, both when I joined the company, but also when I took on responsibility for Wefox as a CPO in parallel to my role with the insurance company, was just how open people are. You know, you sort of step into a senior role in an organization, and I have to admit I was a little bit nervous you don't know how people are going to respond to you, and particularly if you've been brought in to make some changes and to change how people work together in let's say a fairly dynamic environment. And I was really taken aback just by how open people were in providing information, being available, providing support, celebrating my successes and guiding me through that process. And this is something that has held true throughout the nearly 3 years that I've been with the company. So this is something that I really has struck me, I think, quite a bit with this organization. When it comes to the process for both interns and associates, so as you can imagine, we do get quite a few applications. So there's a screening process of CVs. I would encourage any aspiring product manager to have a very well-structured CV. Google what a good CV looks like, or a resume, and make sure that you follow those guidelines. It's the first thing I look for. Has somebody Googled what is a good CV? And then there's a screening process. We have like a small committee of group product managers and senior product managers who do the screening of the CVs. They come with a short list, then there's an interview, a single interview, and then a longer interview with more of a panel. And then a decision is made, offers are sent, and best case, we have a few interns and associates join us over the next few months. Okay.
So I'm assuming in the interview you're also looking for some of the transferable skills that we just kind of, if somebody doesn't have a PM experience, at least if they can show what they have done and if they have thought about these things when they were working, I think they will be really helpful in the interview, if I assume.
Yes, and I think that's your challenge as somebody transferring to product, is to show that you understand what the role of a product manager is, and that you can demonstrate how your experience applies or sets you up for success in the role of a product manager. That's what we'd be looking for.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you for your question, Ashish. So, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. We have more interesting questions coming. We can take one from LinkedIn. For those that do think like product managers, how can you bridge the gap to communicate and work with those that don't or are not familiar? In your experience, how have you translated those frameworks to different stakeholders?
That is a really good question that I'm not sure I've got a good answer to. I mean, sometimes you don't need to, you've got to, again, I think it's about understanding other people's motivations and what they're trying to achieve. And I think this is the key to unlocking a lot of positive communication and good workflow. It's not always easy, right? You can't say, hey, what motivates you? Most people don't know, for starters, and otherwise, you need quite a trusting relationship to get there. But if you do understand their context and where they're coming from and what success looks like for them in their role, this can give you a couple of identifiers of what's important to them. So some people really just want to know and understand, okay, what's the outcome? Give me the least amount of information I need to then action and do my job, because they're much more process oriented or they've got other priorities, and that's okay, right? So it's really about understanding what matters to them. Understanding different people's communication styles can really help, and there's different frameworks that can be used to identify these kinds of things. But yeah, once you know somewhat what motivates someone and what success looks like for them, then typically the rest follows. But I'm not suggesting that that's always so easy.
That's a very interesting point of view. We have Marv in Zoom with a raised hand. Would you like to ask your question?
Hey, yeah, but I mean, in all fairness, like I showed up a little bit late, so I just want to give other people a chance. I'm actually interested to hear the other questions, so you can just circle back to me, and then I'll I'll ask my question if we have time.
Fair enough. So we have one from YouTube I can take. So the question is, should you set KPIs as product manager solely on how users interact with your product? How else can you determine your KPIs in a company?
Yeah, I would say no, unless that is directly linked to business success. The product strategy should follow or must follow the business strategy. And I think this context is really important to bring into a product role in particular. I would argue into any role. But if you're not understanding, as a product organization, if you're not understanding how you'd help the business be successful and what your contribution is to that, then I think there is a very good chance that you have the wrong problem to solve and possibly also looking at the wrong metric. The reason I say that is, let's say you're a VC-backed company and really all they care about is revenue. And you have a feature that your users love and they interact with it on a really frequent basis. Your retention looks really good, your engagement metrics look really good. But if you're not at the end of the day able to monetize those interactions, you're not supporting the business strategy. So that then doesn't translate to something that really is delivering on the business strategy. User metrics won't be sufficient. Understanding how your user metrics connect to the business metrics is really important, but they're always a step in between, something that I don't want to say matters more, but something that will be measured by your investors, by your shareholders, and then by your CEO.
Okay, thank you. I think we can take one question from LinkedIn. So it's a bit long, so bear with me for a second. Recently, I have found in many discussions with PMs and product leaders across the tech space that their main pain points have often revolved around their ability to innovate or lack thereof, especially as organization and companies scale to larger size, because processes may become more set in their ways. How do you enable them to innovate and continuously challenge how those problems are solved successfully and dynamically?
I mean, we've got a little bit of an advantage because we have an entire team who's reporting to me, focused on innovation. And I'm not saying you need a department for innovation. I think innovation is something that needs to be lived by many people in an organization to have real impact. But we've consciously invested in innovation. And there's two areas that we look at for innovation. One is around operational processes, exactly. So how do we use machine learning and artificial intelligence to automate or to speed up or make more user-friendly interactions that operations people have with our technology, or salespeople or customers have with our technology, and ultimately improving their experience. We're also consciously looking at, let's say, Horizon 3 innovation. And this is innovating on the customer experience. So actually creating new business lines and new revenue streams is something that we have as part of our business strategy. So this is a very, let's say, luxury position to be in many ways. I think culture is an important factor here. You know, I can say, look, you know, understand the problem you're solving, make sure you're measuring it, do research to understand what's possible. But it is a lot about mindset, and that mindset and expectations really come from the top. And if that is something that is championed and supported by the leadership team, and then it cascades down, this is really what it takes. Whereas if you've got a pocket of innovation where innovation's happening, but it isn't matching the culture of the organization, this can be an uphill battle. I'm not saying it's not possible, of course it is. And I think there's a lot of value in trying out something small to prove the value, to get the buy-in and to start to change hearts and minds. But at the end of the day, it comes down to people who make decisions. So yes, challenging. Work at a scale up and you won't have that problem.
Yeah. Well, I relate a lot with what you're saying. I've been lucky enough to work in companies that did believe also in innovation. And sometimes people see it as like, oh, I just had an idea. Let me implement it. And it's actually more about creating that mindset and fostering the culture of innovation and triggering it and creating, I mean, letting people know that it's important, that they have to sit down and also brainstorm. And it is challenging, but it's also rewarding.
I think having a clear innovation goal and knowing what you're looking to achieve with innovation is also important and can help with the communication into the organization. So maybe that's a place to start.
Thank you. Counselor, do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, maybe let's take one final one. I mean, I see a lot of them. Maybe let's try to choose the best one. And we don't know what Marv is about to ask, so we can't really judge. If you want to type it in, feel free.
That's fine. It's okay. I guess maybe I just missed my chance this time. It's all good.
You can still post your question and we'll try to make it answered offline. So you can do
Sure,
it.
okay.
In the chat.
I'll do that. Okay, thanks. Or maybe Sam, I'll like if that's okay with you, like also ping you maybe on LinkedIn and ask you a question there. Yeah, and I'll tag you guys.
Great, thank you. Well, we can try one last question from LinkedIn. The question is, can one PM successfully manage inbound and outbound work duties for 2 products at a time?
What's inbound and outbound work duties mean?
I'm not sure, but maybe we can try to answer to the, can a PM work on 2 products at the same time?
I'm sure, well, I mean, it depends, right? So I would still view myself as a PM, although I'm not actively doing product management work per se, but we've got a, depending on how you cut it, sort of between 5 and 9 different products in the portfolio, right? So I would like to think that I'm successfully managing them, but I'm doing that indirectly. But I'm guessing this isn't what the question's about. I think I'd separate 2 things. So I do think it is possible for a product manager to manage 2 squads. But here we're not talking about product ownership. We're not talking about being a very, very hands-on style of product management, but this kind of more elevated working with the team to solve problems. The engineering team I'm talking about here, then yes, it's possible. I would recommend doing it for a relatively limited amount of time because I think burnout there is a real risk. And then I think the point around maybe inbound and outbound work is typically it's easier cognitively, or the sort of mental loads for people to do one type of work. So if you've already got a very broad scope, having to work at a lot of different levels, I think for many people is going to be very challenging, and it can work for a period of time. But it wouldn't be the approach that I'd recommend. I think having that focus, really understanding and building empathy for your users, being able to think about all of the other things around communication, which is also important to make a successful product. Typically there's enough work in that to keep one person busy on one product at a time, I'd say.
Yeah, and if you do more, you have to for sure sacrifice on something, which can be user understanding or stakeholder management. So
yeah, and different products in different phases need different types of care, right? So if something's in maintenance phase or it's sort of running along, then yes, I mean, it's probably possible, but to build 2 products from more or less scratch, which if you're in a startup or a scale up world is often the level of intensity that you've got, this will be challenging, yes.
Great. I think we can close it here. Thanks, everybody. I'm very happy. We had so many questions, so many interesting questions. And again, for the ones that we didn't manage to address during the call, during the talk, we'll try to get you guys an answer asynchronously. Thank you very much, Sam, for being here, for spreading knowledge generously, for sharing your experience. I can speak for myself. I go home figuratively with interesting learnings and takeaways. So thank you. Thank you guys for being here in Zoom, for interacting with us, and thanks to all the others who are watching and who will watch the recording afterwards. If you like this, well, know that we do this every week. So we can meet same place, same time next week for a next interesting talk. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And thank you, Angelica, for hosting.